Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
Time for Truth Show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth Show. It's a pleasure to be back with you again tonight. And I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff. You know, many of you have been asking, before we get into the show, how do I avail of all the previous episodes? Very simple. Go on YouTube, A Time for Truth Show. Click the subscribe button. We'd be more than happy to have you as one of our members. There's no fee. And the purpose is creating a world that's flourishing, prospering with truth, an unknown commodity. A little bit of, humor at the beginning of the show, but it's a commodity that's so important for our world. And tonight we're going to speak and delve into another commodity, extremely important for our show and for the world and for everywhere, really: leadership. Why did I pause? Because I'm wondering, what is leadership? We're going to find out on this show. And here we go. Engineer, if we put up the pictures, because tonight on our Time for Truth show, in a world that's been searching for leaders, communication, values that build trust, our special guest brings a perspective forged across business, adventure, sports, and global humanitarian work. His name is Lance Miller. Then you see him running across Europe. Lance is the 2005 world champion of public speaking through Toastmasters International, and an internationally recognized speaker who has delivered more than 5,000 presentations in over 60 countries on leadership, executive communication, and effective management. He is the CEO of TerraX LLC, providing innovative, sustainable technologies across agriculture, commerce, industry, and marine markets. His career includes executive leadership with the 1984 Los Angeles Olympic Organizing Committee, with Nestle's and Anheuser-Busch, along with launching multiple successful business ventures across 8 different industries. But Mr. Miller doesn't just talk about leadership. He exudes and lives it. From climbing 14,000-foot peaks, rafting America's toughest whitewater rivers, sailing across the Atlantic, piloting his own aircraft across the United States, and diving beneath frozen lakes. His life experiences have shaped a powerful perspective of resilience and human potential. His humanitarian work spans the globe, serving with Citizens for an Alternative Tax System, appearing on more than 150 television and talk radio programs, organizing international human rights marathons with the International Foundation of Human Rights and Tolerance, and supporting the Set a Good Example contest and the Way to Happiness Foundation that exists in more than 100 countries in over 110 languages, promoting ethics, trust, and responsibility. Tonight, Lance Miller and I will explore an essential and pivotal topic in our world. Leadership is everybody's business. And let's bid a warm welcome to Lance Miller to A Time for Truth show. Welcome, Lance.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me on your show today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and I want to get right to it because I know you have so much to give. And, there's thousands, probably, I don't know, tens of thousands of books, and God knows what else has been written about leadership. How do you describe what leadership is, Lance?
Well, that's a great question to lead off with. Ben, I've sat on panels with people that have written 5 and 6 books about leadership, and they've actually said on the panel, I really am still grasping with what it is. I'm trying to get it, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Now, I read a great book on leadership, and if you haven't read it, I recommend it. If you want to know what leadership is, I looked it up in the dictionary. Okay, and that actually, and when you look up a word in the dictionary, I don't just read it. I go down and figure out where it came from, in our history. And the word lead comes from a Latin word which means to go. So if you're leading, you're going someplace. So here's what leadership is. It consists primarily, in my book, 2 things if you're a leader. First of all, you got to know where you're going. And there's a lot of organizations I've been in that we were all running around and nobody knew where they were going. The guy running the organization didn't know where we were going. He was just trying to be busy. So the first thing is you got to know where you're going. The second thing is you have to arrive there. Now, if you know where you're going and you arrive there, you're a leader. If you know where you're going, you can't arrive there, you're not a very good leader. It's that simple. So we can apply that to any business situation. As you said, I've done a lot of adventure activities. I always knew where I was going. I never got in my airplane and took off and didn't know where I was going. That would be suicide. You don't know, what you're going into. You plan everything out so you knew you could land someplace safely. That's effective leadership. You know where you're going and you figure out how to arrive there. And that's really the simplicity that I look at when I'm trying to lead organizations or sort out businesses. Where are we going with this? How are we going to get there?
Well, you know what? It sounds simple, but I can tell you because I've had my own business and there's an international foundation that I run, and it's not really so simple because when you get dealing with people, there's a lot of chaos and turmoil that comes out. You get lost, and it seems very simple now sitting here in front of this table with you and another table. But in the real world, what you're saying is very important because otherwise you start giving orders that have absolutely nothing to do with what's going on. There's a chaos of people coming up to you. And I totally agree with you. In fact, another thing I wanted to ask you is because so much has been written recently about leadership versus management. And are they 2 completely different and separate subjects? And so my question to you would be, how do you view the relationship or the association or not of leadership and management?
Great question. And just to address what you're talking about, there's a lot of components we can talk about with leadership. But as a leader, you have to keep in mind where you're going, and you have to realize I'm trying to get my group there. So when all that confusion starts to happen, you still have to keep primarily we're trying to get to this location or we're trying to achieve this goal. And and if you go down into the soup, you're going to get lost. But let's talk about leadership and management. I've been on the stage with people that said they're 2 completely different things. Leaders aren't managers, managers aren't leaders. I'm just going to tell you my experience, and that's what I draw on. I've never seen a good leader that wasn't a good manager, and I've never seen a good manager that wasn't a good leader. They're 2 sides of the same coin. Now management is hands-on, it's getting things done, but the whole idea is we got to know where we're going and we have to arrive there. To arrive there, we've got to organize things. We have to manage the activity that we're involved in so we can arrive there. But the leadership is a little higher level goal in setting the standards, setting the attitude that everybody has. Management is really, connecting the dots and seeing that people achieve their objectives. But if you try to manage without having a high morale and a high goal and aspirations in your people, you turn into just an oppressive dictator. And if you try to lead without giving those fundamental tools, people don't win with your leadership. You have this vision, but you never accomplish it. So to me, they're actually the two sides of the same coin. To be a good leader, you got to be able to manage. To be a good manager, you got to be able to lead.
It makes a lot of sense to me. And it seems like really what you're saying also incorporates the empathy, the understanding that being has that comprehension. He's just not, like you said, he's not a Hitler, he's not a Napoleon. He's more like maybe a Michael Jordan leading his whole team and recognizing the value of his teammates. And I wanted to ask you, because you have so much talking in business, in government, and even, I know a lot of my friends personally in their relationships feel that, I don't know, so in our world we have so much technology, but the trust and confidence are like just flying away, disappearing, collapsing. And, how do you feel that intertwines with a leader? And what separates a leader from a non-leader in terms of these values?
Well, quite honestly, we could talk for an hour on that question right there. The trust and confidence comes in with really the attitude that the leader has. You have to take total responsibility for your group. And on it, but let me, when I've looked at these, I've come up with I like to keep things simple. I like to keep things real fundamental. Then I can go up on it, expand on it.
Makes sense.
So my separation between a leader and what I would call a non-leader or a follower is the leader has an attitude that he's going to figure it out for himself. The follower is waiting for someone else to figure it out. And this started when I was a kid. I used to unload trucks for my family's business. We had a 40-foot trailer. It was backed up to some old warehouse someplace. And we'd open the doors. I'd be in the 8th grade or something, 7th grade, open the doors, and there's no room in the warehouse to put the stuff in the truck in there. And I'd walk down to our plant, get us foreman. They'd come back. We'd figure out how to do it, go in. See, I wasn't the leader. The foreman was the leader. Finally, one day I opened it up and I go, I'm going to walk down, get somebody. They're going to figure it out. Let's just figure out how to put it in here. And at that point, I started figuring out for myself how to make these things work. And I started leading at that point. But the person who's waiting for someone to come tell them what to do is not the leader. The leader is the guy that goes, hey, here's the solution. I'm figuring this out. Let's try this. So it's a real clear point. And there's so many people, we sort of get hypnotized into, as kids, our parents are telling us what to do. We have 12, 16 years of school. We're told what seat to sit in. We have to raise our hand before we can talk. We always learned that other people figured out. I never had a class that said figure something out for yourself. Everything I studied in school was learning what somebody else figured out. Then I got a job and they hired me and they said, okay, you can sit here, don't rock the boat. If we like you, we'll promote you someday. At no point did anybody ever say, well, why don't you figure out how to do something better? And we get conditioned that we're going to listen to the authority and we're waiting for the authority to tell us it's okay to act. And I've gone through this I've coached 600-700 people in speaking, and I went through this myself in speaking. You're so used to waiting for an authority to give you approval because that's what we got conditioned coming up through life. Well, when we start to shed those shackles of that approval and we start deciding for ourselves what we're going to do, that's when we start to take over our life and we can start leading our own lives, or we can start leading others in directions that we want to go. So you got to figure it out for yourself. And that's a simple concept, but it's pretty dynamic and broad when you start looking at it.
Absolutely. As you were talking, and I want your opinion on this, I was actually looking at the conflicts that are existing globally. And as you were talking, I said, well, wait a second here. I can almost see that even though you have these figures at the top of countries, have they really sat down to really take a look? What is the benefit of these wars that they're waging if they're destroying all these resources and their own people on both sides? How much have they actually sat down and logically or rationally looked at in terms of leadership of solving it in some other way. Am I off in left field somewhere, or is this part of the
No,
course
and
that you're
one
going
of the things that you're right on. One of the things that happens with this whole leadership game is that if a leader's not confident and you don't have I don't care if it's a company or a country, if you don't have a good product and you're not really working in an optimum manner, then what you want to do is through control and force, intimidation and validation, things like that, control people that you're going to control them, and then you're going to select an enemy that they have. And they have to stay with you because of this enemy. And I know we've talked about this off camera. I've done, for 7-8 years, I did a whole series of international human rights runs for 2,000 and 3,000 miles through 17, 18 countries. A lot of that was on a religious freedom basis, but there were attacks on religions that were going on to try to criminally charge people for practicing their religion. But here's, every time we did these runs, individually, the people all got along great. But the quote unquote leader was creating the conflict to serve their agenda.
right?
And they were endangering their flock, as you would say, their people. They were endangering their people for their own ego and their own sense of rightness at the expense of the world and other people. And that, to me, that is not, again, we're really coming off leadership, because the whole idea of leadership is figuring out where you want to go and arriving there. And I've got other components in it too, that the whole thing, it's everybody's business. That means we all have to be on the same page when we're going someplace. As a leader, I can't whip enough people to get them to go there. I don't have enough time in the day to whip everybody to get them to go there. I need people wanting to get there on their own interest and their own willingness and their own determinism, you know.
It's so important. You're totally right, because you get so much further that way. There's so much energy that you can harness that way. I wanted to ask you, because there's another concept that you brought out to me and I was looking at that was very interesting about this servant leadership. There's been a lot of literature, a lot of promotion about it. And what is your feeling on this servant leadership in terms of its potential to overcome barriers and these blocks that happen in terms of getting something done?
Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden, this became in some of the organizations I work with, it became a really hot button the last 7, 8, and 10 years. You know, so I'm a servant leader, and I go, the only reason they have a term called servant leadership is because people didn't understand what leadership was, and they were doing oppressive leadership. Servant leadership is what leadership is. But because people were so confused on it, and they started trying to use force and intimidation and things on people to lead them instead of uplifting them and getting them on the same page. Again, leadership is everybody's business. Let's get everybody on the same page going someplace. You know, the Marines have a saying that leaders eat last. And the whole thing is you're making sure your people are okay. And in the number of organizations I've worked in, I've always taken the viewpoint that I got to make sure my people are okay. I have to make sure my people understand the game. I have to make sure that they have the resources they need to accomplish what they need to accomplish, that we're all on the same page. And a lot of times that means I'm working 18, 20 hours a day to make sure that they've got the stuff that they can come in and get stuff done. But if I've also worked for organizations where the boss came in 3 hours a day and wanted all this stuff done, and we were all in confusion, and you know, the boss, that wasn't good leadership. I said that was a fiefdom. That was a kingdom that he was running, and those businesses I ran in were kingdoms. That's what they wanted. They wanted a bunch of minions working for them so they could achieve their money, you know, and that doesn't inspire people and doesn't, you know. And here's the simplicity, Ben. I always go, you know, we just finished the Super Bowl 8 weeks ago or something. I go, how hard would an NFL team play if the owner was the only one who got Super Bowl ring?
Right.
What would happen is everybody would show up and they'd do the irreducible minimum that they needed to do out on the field. They'd run, they'd tackle, because the owner gets all the benefit. When you have an NFL team trying to win the Super Bowl, everybody on that team, even the equipment managers, want to win that game. Everybody's on board playing as hard as they can. And I've had a few organizations I've worked for like that. The '84 Olympic Committee was like that. It was the most incredible experience I ever had working in a large organization, putting the Olympics on, turned the whole Olympic movement around on it. I did an internet startup where we had a specific goal to sell the company for $100 million in 10 months. Unfortunately, the bubble popped. Yeah, nobody's buying companies, but we hit our target and we played that target for blood. You know, you're talking about Toastmasters. I was part of a team that took a Toastmasters club that was failing, struggling, and we decided we wanted to be a top 10 club in the world, and it took 5 years, and we built that club up to 95 members, 2 meetings a week. We were the number 4 club internationally out of 16,000 clubs in 1999, and it was one of the most incredible experiences to get everybody on the same team, and everybody wanted to win together, and that's what I love putting together, and that is everything with servant leadership. You're serving your people so your people can win, and if you're not doing that, you're oppressing your people so you can win. And the only reason we have the term servant leadership is people don't understand leadership and decide to oppress people to achieve their objectives.
Well, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. And, you know, it kind of leads me to the next question I had, because it seems like in every organization, you have people, I don't know, it seems like their whole purpose in life is to cause chaos, or to, you say this, they come up with a negative. And so I'm talking about internal conflict that I find, even in the groups that I run, is very divisive. And my question to you, which I'm sure the viewers would love to hear your take on this and your viewpoint, how are we supposed to handle difficult people who just never seem to go with anything, always is a problem? Tell us a little bit about that, Mr. Miller.
Well, there have been several I'd like to shoot, but that's unpopular today. So
yeah,
I would say
there was
a time. There was a time it was the honorable thing to do. But no, here's the whole thing. We got to see, is this person actually a negative person? I'll use the analogy of rowing a boat. Are we all rowing and somebody's having a hard time, they don't know how to paddle? Or are they actually sticking their paddle in and not rowing, or are they pushing backwards? Okay, and they know exactly what they're doing. So the first thing, in order to get them on the same page, there's 2 main tools I use, which is communication and agreement. And that's really what an organization runs on, agreement and communication. And I would just say, in my experience, the amount of communication necessary to run an organization is grossly underestimated. It's not a memo once a week. It's 2 or 3 meetings a day with people. It's personal meetings. It's taking people out for coffee, seeing how they're doing. It's going on a ride along with a salesperson and see how they're selling and making sure that they're winning at their job. It's a lot of communication. And the point is, if you have disagreement, and I'm going to give you a definition. I said I read a great book on agreement. It's called The Dictionary. But my definition of agreement is this: it's cooperation without conflict.
Right.
So you look at an orchestra. An orchestra is in agreement, and actually, there's things in music that is called agreement. if everybody's not playing the same tune in an orchestra, it's a mess. But everybody's in agreement with what they're doing. They're all cooperating without conflict. So if we have conflict, we know we have disagreement. So we have to use communication, and I'm going to go through we do a deep dive, but there's 5 points of communication, or 5 points of agreement I want to make sure I know. Please. And I want my people to know. The first one is, where are we going? We all agree on where we're going. If we don't, we're going to have disagreement. Second one is, why are we going there?
Right.
Okay. Third one is, how are we getting there? Okay. Fourth one is, who is doing what? In a lot of organizations, you get disagreements because one person thinks they're supposed to do a job and somebody else is doing it, and they're bumping into each other. Okay, so who's doing what? And the last one, and this is critical, is what metrics are we measuring?
Right.
And what happens in leadership, if we don't measure hard metrics, and there's an old saying, you can't manage something you can't measure. You can't manage your car unless you have a speedometer and you got a fuel gauge and you got a temperature gauge and you got an oil light. You can't manage your car. You don't know how fast you're going. You don't know how much gas you got in it. You've got to be able to measure those things. So I always try to find hard metrics that I can say, here's what we're measuring. If you don't have hard metrics, you're managing by opinion. And opinions are like armpits. Everybody's got a couple, but nobody wants to experience the other person's. Okay. So let's go back to the difficult person. I keep things simple. So you've got all this agreement. You're trying to handle this guy. You're trying to let's get this agreement. Let's get them on the same page, and it's just not working. When you have somebody who's difficult, you have two choices. You either resolve the situation or you dissolve the situation.
Right.
Those are your two choices. And one of the worst things you can do as a leader is leave a negative, toxic individual in your group. Because if you have one toxic person and 10 positive people, that one toxic person doesn't just negate one individual. That negative toxic person has an effect on all 10.
Right.
Okay, so it's not just one for one. One toxic person can just bring an entire group down. So I'm very sensitive to watch how communication happens, how activities happen, how people treat each other, and watching that I don't have someone in there that's creating upsets, creating conflict, creating disagreements in here all the time. And so we get everybody on the same page. And again, we could do a 2-hour show on that subject alone.
Oh, I can imagine, because, sometimes you think it's everybody, like you said, but no, it's like they infect all the others. And, if you get rid of the bacteria, you don't have the disease. Unfortunately, we had a great show because it's been a lot of fun, so we ran out of time. But I want to ask you one quick question. We have like about a minute left, I think.
Okay.
What final comment would you like to leave the viewers that you feel is really the most important points to cover for 2026 and beyond?
Well, I think we all have to really develop a sense of personal integrity and a self-determined viewpoint in life, where we're not allowing other people to dictate what we do. We have to own our own lives. And one of the things I did, and we've talked about this before, I developed a very strong set of personal values that I follow. Yeah, and a lot of those come from experience with adventures and things. But we've talked about this little book, The Way to Happiness, it's got actually 57 points spread across 21 chapters that are universal in life. And I use that little book in almost everything I do to maintain the value integrity I have. So if I run into confusion, I can go look up where is it. I've done enough now. I don't need to look at the book all the time. But I know you promote that a lot, and I want to bring it up. Sure. It's a great tool for any situation that you get into on maintaining your integrity, maintaining your personal determinism in life versus, like I said, being controlled by others. Because that's one of the things that happens. Is not that being controlled by others is bad, but we have to be willing and allow others to control us and not have them dictate what we're doing. So really setting yourself up into a strong sense of personal integrity.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? First of all, thank you for being on the show. A great show. I had a lot of fun. I'm sure the viewers have learned a lot. This book that you mentioned, I love also. First time I looked at it, I go, well, this is very simple. And the more I read it, I go, wow, I need to apply it. I can read it, but I need to apply it. So thank you for bringing that book out, The Way to Happiness. And Lance Miller, thank you so much for everything. All of you watching, let's do what Lance Miller said. Let's look at how we can serve each other. Life is a miracle. We have so much. Secretary Kennedy said recently, we live like gods today. He said, we have so much. Let's appreciate what we have. We'll see you on the next episode of A Time for Truth Show. Have a good night.
This show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep along at your feet.